Good afternoon. I'm Suzy Vance from Creating from the Heart, the Artistry of Living, and I'm here with Tim Griffin, a wonderful veteran that I know. So, Tim, you were a pilot.
I was.
Did you ever know that you were going to be a pilot when you were younger?
I always wanted to be a pilot since I was about 8 years old.
What happened when you were 8 that told you you wanted to be a
My
pilot?
father took me to an air show at Glenview Naval Air Station, which is now a huge residential community.
And what did you see there?
I saw jet planes, Cutlass I remember distinctly. Was able to get into the cockpit.
Ooh.
Yeah.
And did you see on that occasion that other favorite airplane of yours? What was that?
Not yet. It was the Caribou.
And when did you first see a Caribou?
Pictures of the Caribou when I was in high school. And it was an Army airplane, short takeoff and landing stall, they call it. Twin engine, radial engine, cargo carrier, troop carrier. And that's all I wanted to fly was the Caribou.
And you saw pictures of it. Were you still going out to that airfield?
No, that was an air show,
I see.
one weekend. So.
Okay. So you knew you wanted to fly it. So then what?
So it was an Army airplane, and so I had to be in the Army. So I joined the Army ROTC
When you went to college?
when I went to college, and lo and behold, when I was a junior, the Army made a deal with the Air Force that the Army would have all rotary wing and the Air Force would have all fixed wing.
Uh-oh.
There goes the Caribou from the Army to the Air Force.
Oh, dear.
And if I had any wits about me, I would have transferred to the Air Force ROTC, but I wasn't thinking, so there was no Caribou.
So what did you do?
They flew rotary wing helicopters, and they promised me fixed wing. So the only fixed wing aircraft, really the only one they had, was a King Air. So I have 40 hours of a King Air. It's a 10 person airplane, but I flew lots of helicopters, and helicopters are great fun. Much more difficult to fly.
You're flying with your feet and your hands.
And your
right?
hands. You have
Wow.
all four at once. So it was good.
You're in college. You're in ROTC. And what are you thinking about your future? Is Vietnam on your...
No.
Not thinking about Vietnam at all?
Not at all.
Are you thinking about service? What are you thinking?
Well, I was thinking about graduate school because I wanted to and knew I was going to go to graduate school. So the military thing was a little bit out of mind. Vietnam really hadn't started up at that point.
So you went to graduate school?
Went to graduate school.
At the University of Illinois.
You're right. Got an
And
MBA.
what's happening while you're in graduate school about flying? Anything?
No.
Interesting.
No, not a thing.
And then what happened to get you back into flying?
Well, I got out of graduate school, but I had my commitment to the Army. So
Because of ROTC.
I was a second lieutenant. I was gathering whatever they call it, time and grade. They deferred my active duty for 2 years.
While you were in graduate school.
While I was in graduate school. So then I had to go in. After
And
that.
what year are we talking?
That was the fall of 67.
Okay.
And I went to primary flight school in Mineral Wells, Texas. I'll never forget it. But it was so much fun.
The flying was.
The flying, and it was fun. I liked my fellow students, and the flying was just out of sight. And then after 6 months, you went on to finish, and virtually the whole class had to go to a place called Fort Rucker, which was
Where's
not,
that?
it's in southern Alabama.
Okay.
But about 10% of the class got to go to Savannah, Georgia, Hunter Airfield, and I was one of the lucky ones. And that was the most fun I ever had. I had a little cottage on the water. It was the Savannah River, but it was tidal, so that when high tide came, it looked like the ocean. The water was to the horizon. And I had a little cottage, and I had a boat, and it was just glorious.
This is when you're getting ready to go to Vietnam?
I was finishing the last 6 months of flight school, yes.
Okay.
Knowing Vietnam
was on the horizon. How are you feeling about that?
No apprehension, looking forward to it.
Knew it was
looking forward to flying.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Okay. So then you go along and it's your time. You get sent to Vietnam.
Mm-hmm.
And you arrive in Vietnam. What did you see?
It's interesting. I remember they had a very steep approach going into a place called Ben Hoa, which is a great big Air Force base. And we were on a commercial airplane.
Mm-hmm.
And they just did this approach because it was a little bit dangerous, I guess. And I remember seeing big craters from bombs. And I remember that. Anyway, we landed, and I spent 2 days there waiting for the unit I was going to be assigned to, because you're just there.
Mm-hmm.
And they have to figure out, okay, this guy is a pilot. He's a first lieutenant or second lieutenant. Where is he? And he's in the cavalry. Where is he going to go? So 2 or 3 days of just hanging out in this kind of awful place, a barracks basically. I got picked up in the 3rd of the 17th Air Cavalry, A Troop, the Silver Spurs. They sent an aircraft over.
From?
Not very far away.
Mm-hmm.
It was an airfield called Redcatcher, which was in Long Binh. Just a 15-minute flight.
So they send somebody over to get you?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And they take you...
They took me back to Redcatcher.
And what happened at Redcatcher?
The first night I was there, there was a mortar attack, or a rocket attack, I forget. And I didn't even know, I had no idea what was happening, but everybody piled into this bunker, and it's a memory I have. And then we almost immediately moved to a place called Xi'an, which was about pretty close north of Saigon.
Right.
And what happens in Xi'an? What are your responsibilities? So you're flying a helicopter.
Flying a helicopter.
How often do you fly?
Every day.
Every day.
Every day, from dawn until dusk.
Do you fly at night at all?
We did fly at night. It was always a disaster.
Why was that?
Accidents. We never found any enemy action. Pilots got tired in the middle of the night. There were 2 accidents, no fatalities, but damage to the aircraft. And it was just a bad idea to fight at night.
So what you were flying, you were, I think, if I remember correctly, you were a scout pilot?
I was a scout pilot at first.
And what does a scout pilot do?
A scout pilot flies with a gunship. The scout is heavily armed as well, and you fly low and slow trying to find the enemy, and if you find him, you engage him, and theoretically the gunship comes in and does the shooting, but the scouts did as much shooting as the gunships. But I got shot down twice as a scout, and they said, why don't you go over and be a gunship pilot? It's a little safer. And that was fine with me. So I spent probably the last 4 months of my 1-year tour as a gunship pilot.
And that was, the practice was basically also when you were, as they say, short, which is getting close to coming home, they want to put you in positions where hopefully you won't, haven't gotten hurt yet, you won't get hurt before you go home.
When you're short, it's like you've got 2-3 weeks to go. They really take you out of the AO. They just put you on a desk somewhere because you get nervous, you get cautious, and you can hurt yourself being overly cautious. You make mistakes, and so they figured that out. And
so tell us about being shot down.
Well, the first time they shot my tail rotor, and you can fly a helicopter without a tail rotor, but in this case, it was partially shot up, and there was such a vibration that I thought the aircraft was going to come apart, so I put it down. And our troop, every day, we had a platoon of infantry with Hueys, 5 Hueys. They were part of our troop. And they would come out to where we were operating, and in case someone went down, they'd stand by and they'd come and rescue you. And so they came, and it was amazing. I was standing out in some grass, marshland, as I recall, and they just swoop in. And a pilot named Oberhauser was flying the ship I got onto, and I was so happy to not be in danger any longer. And the second time is a little more vague. Just one shot to the engine. The engine failed, and that was at the end of the runway at a place called Bearcat, which was a small airfield. And I don't remember who picked me up then. Somebody did. I don't remember who it was. I remember Oberhauser the first time.
So if you had to say what this service to our country meant to you, what would you say?
Oh gosh. I was just doing my job. I don't think I was particularly into the war. I wasn't anti-war, but all I wanted to do was not screw up and not get any Americans injured or wounded. And so I wanted to be the best pilot possible, and not thinking ideologically at all, not thinking about the enemy as an enemy. But if someone would shoot me, I would shoot at them, that sort of thing.
And
I never shot at anyone who did not have a weapon and would not shoot me.
Okay.
So.
And if my memory serves me correctly, there were a number of people in your troop for which you were responsible who did die. Is that
yes.
right?
That is exactly right.
How many people were in your troop?
Well, of course, everybody's rotating all the time, but there were 30 pilots, roughly, and of those 30, we had 10 killed, and I'd say another 10 wounded, and I never had a scratch. So.
Thank goodness. You came home to me.
Yes, I did. Yes, I did.
So if you had somebody who was young in high school or college and came to you and said, should I join the service? Why should I join the service? What would you say to them?
I would say, if you're interested in Well, I can only speak for aviation, but if you're at all interested in flying, the best way to do it is join the service, because they'll spend $1 million training you to fly, and it's exciting. And hopefully there wouldn't be a war going on, although there's always that risk. So I would encourage it. That I have no regrets. It was so exciting. I was in for 3 years, and every year was more exciting than the last. So it was good. It was good.
And I also remember that whenever we are talking, one of the things you always say is, Vietnam, flying in the military was my finest hour. What makes you say that?
It was my finest hour. It's because I was a good pilot. I was a very good platoon leader. My troops, my pilots respected me as I respected them. And, there were some instances where I stood up and did a good job. And it was my finest hour. I've never experienced anything like that before or since. So I take some pride in that.
After you came back, one of the things you did was trained pilots. And I think you got a little challenged because you trained pilots so well. Can you tell us about that?
It's sort of funny. I was the flight leader, so I had 15 IPs, instructor pilots, and we had 30 student pilots. It was the last phase of their flying. They were getting their wings after the month with us, and we taught them contact flying, which meant you're in the aircraft, you're going to be flying in Vietnam. It's not a trainer, and we're going to show you
what it's like.
And there was an evaluation after each month, each cycle of students.
Meaning who evaluated who?
The student evaluated the instructor, and the branch, it was called the branch commander, my commanding officer, who I will never forget, his name was Weatherford. He called me into his office, and he had this evaluation, and he flung it across his desk at me, and he said, "Look at this," sternly. And I read it, and in effect it said, Captain Griffin was the best instructor I ever had in my full year of flight training. He taught me things I'd never believed possible that a helicopter could do. And so I showed him the extremes. I landed him to the ground. I auto-rotated. You cut the engine on the student, and we would go all the way to the ground, which was not allowed. And I read it and I thought, man, I'm proud of that evaluation. But he was sanctioning me. He said, don't ever violate the regulations, or something like that. Didn't bother me a bit. I still am proud of that evaluation. And presumably the other students felt the same way. I had a lot of students. So that.
Well, think of how many lives you might have saved.
Yeah,
because you taught them what the airplane could do.
Exactly.
All right. Now, someone once told you, I believe, that it was important to go to reunions. Who said that to you?
A guy named Tom McGowan, who was my brother Andy's classmate at Notre Dame, who was a Marine platoon and later company commander in Vietnam. He's 2 years older than I am. And he was out here visiting. They had a reunion at South Bend, and he was staying with my brother, who's a neighbor of mine. And I knew Tom from back when they were in college, and so we were visiting, and he said, "Yeah, have you ever been to one?" No, I'm not into that. And he said, "Go to a reunion." So I went. I signed up. My troop met every other year or every third year, something like that. So I signed up for one and went. And I think, as I've told you, it wasn't 5 minutes when I was in this reception for dinner when a guy came up to me. His name was John Earwood, and he said that I had changed his life.
He said he had to talk to you right now.
Yeah, I have to talk to you.
And you said, "But I have to take my dinner to my wife."
Right.
And he said, no, I have to talk to you right now. And then what?
And he said, "You set a moral standard for me. I was a bum and angry when I got to Vietnam, and you set a moral standard for me." And I was, whoa. So I was honored. And then, that was such an evening. Two things happened. That was the most important one. But another one, another guy came up to me and said that I had set him straight as well, straight and narrow. So that was pretty powerful, because I never thought of myself as setting any standard for anybody. Had my own problems.
And then we had a number of mini reunions with the people that you really knew when you were in Vietnam.
Yeah, the big reunions were many people who I didn't know, because in our troop there were hundreds of people. The war lasted for years, and I was only there for 1 year. But some of these people were my really dear friends in Vietnam, and they came to. We went somewhere.
We went to Georgia.
We went to Georgia.
Savannah,
right. And then they came to my house, and they slept
with their wives.
With their wives. Some stayed with us. We have plenty of room to sleep. My brother was generous, and we put some people up at Paul Levy's house too. So I think there were 9 couples, and it was great. It was really great, because then you've got nothing but time to tell your stories again.
And we also sat around in a circle for the first time, and the women were sitting with us, so the women got to hear the stories.
Right. Suzy set up in our living room. She set up 4 academy tables, but she set them so that it wasn't a circle, but it was a square.
We were all facing
We
each
were
other.
all looking at each other, and wives included. And there we went. We started telling stories, and the wives participated. It was just great. And I remember the food was great as well. We had lasagna. We had homemade lasagna.
Yeah.
So.
Well, thank you very much, Tim Griffin, for sharing your story with us. We really appreciate it.
Oh, good.
Okay, Creating from the Heart, the Artistry of Living. I'm here with my pilot, Tim Griffin, my hero.